Hello, hello. Today I want to share with you an episode from a podcast that I love, I've supported for a long time, and I'm even friends with the hosts. And this is the Fall Line podcast. The Fall Line is moving back to what they do best this August, which are deep dive long form series. But while you're waiting on the new season, you can check out some of their back catalog, which are cases that are in desperate need of more attention. They focus on missing people, unsolved homicides, and unidentified persons who have gotten little, if any, media attention. If you've heard of the case of the Millbrook twins, which are missing fraternal twins from Georgia, you're probably hearing about it because of the Fall Line. Even if you hear it on another podcast, they were the first to give this case national attention. The Fall Line uses narrative storytelling, primary and archival research, as well as interviews with family members and also experts like forensic anthropologists, genealogists, DNA experts, investigators, and so on. But not only do they introduce you to the victims and the survivors and their stories, they're exploring the reasons why these cases were ignored in the first place. This week, I'm going to share a clip from the first episode of their two-part series on Matthew Rattlesnake Grant, who was just 21 when he disappeared in November of 2016. Just a year before he went missing, he had moved from Canada to live with his father's family on the Blackfeet Indian Reservation, which is in Montana. But after weeks of searching with no official support, Matthew's family discovered that he had actually been murdered. He was left in a frozen alley to be found by his own loved ones. You are about to hear Matthew's story and his family's ongoing fight for media coverage and justice. As you're listening to this, follow the link in the show notes to hear the rest of the episode, to hear part 2 of Matthew's coverage from the Fall Line, and don't forget to hit follow or subscribe in your favorite podcast app.
This is part 1 of a 2-part series. This series contains discussion of suicide, homicide, crime scenes, and violence. Listener discretion is advised. This is the Fall Line. The name Carolyn DeFord is one that will be familiar to many of our listeners. After all, she's someone that you've heard from on the Fall Line a number of times. We covered her mother, Leona LeClaire Kinsey's missing persons case in 2021, and she connected us with the family of Cherokee Finley last year. Carolyn runs the organization Missing and Murdered Native Americans and works as the Trafficking Project Coordinator at the Puyallup Tribe of Indians. This year, Carolyn brought us 2 more cases and connected us with 2 more families. One of those stories is coming to you later this summer when we move back to our seasonal format, the very deep dive shows and intense coverage we brought you in our first several years. The other is the 2016 case of Matthew Rattlesnake Grant. In December of 2016, Matthew was in a state of transition. He turned 21 that October 31st, Halloween. Just a year before, in late November of 2015, he'd moved from Alberta, Canada to Montana. After traveling back and forth between his maternal and paternal families for most of his life, he decided to settle with his late father, Ray Grant's family, on the Blackfeet Indian Reservation. His aunt, Rhonda Grant Connolly, told us that Matthew was excited to begin his new adventure in Montana. He had lots of plans and hopes, but there just wasn't enough time. Here's what his Aunt Rhonda told us.
He was only here a year. He wanted to work. He didn't have his birth certificate, so he was trying to get his birth certificate because he was enrolled in the States and also in Canada. And he needed that in order to get a job. And for a short time, he moved to Great Falls with my nephew, Jordan Morgan. And they stayed there for about 4 months, and then they moved back here. And eventually he moved in with my sister Fonda, and he just tried to help, family members each and every way he could. He wasn't employed, but we did help him financially, if he needed something with all, he had plenty of aunts and uncles that were willing to help him.
In December of 2016, that was still Matthew's situation. He was living with his aunt, Fonda, not to be confused with Rhonda, and hoping to start work soon. Temperatures had already dropped in Browning, and per KRTV, on December 15th, 2016, there was a winter storm. It was also the last day Matthew Grant's family saw him alive. He left his Aunt Fonda's home that afternoon, promising to return a little later, but Matthew never came home. His family and other community members searched for weeks across the Blackfeet Indian Reservation for any sign of Matthew. And for days, as they later told local media outlets, they had no official outside support in their search. We're told by Matthew's Aunt Rhonda that on the last day of 2016, on New Year's Eve, searchers finally found Matthew in the snow, in an alley, a little north of Browning. He was found only 4 miles or so from home. It was clear, Rhonda says, that he'd been purposely left there. There was an autopsy, but even before that ruling came in, it was obvious. Matthew Grant had been murdered. But why? He'd only been in Montana for a year when he disappeared. Matthew's Aunt Rhonda tells us that the family even has a pretty good idea as to the whys and whos in his case. But now they're waiting for the win, as in win resolution, and justice will come. 6.5 years later, his family in the United States and Canada has yet to see an arrest in his homicide, despite a $10,000 FBI-sponsored reward and a number of tips. Matthew's case is currently unsolved. Matthew's family has worked to get his story out as part of MMIP initiatives, that's Missing and Murdered Indigenous People, since his death. They often work with the family of Ashley Loring Heavyrunner, whose story you may be familiar with. She was featured on Season 3 of the podcast Up and Vanished. Like Matthew, Ashley also lived on the Blackfeet Indian Reservation. She disappeared 7 months after Matthew, in June of 2017. Unlike Matthew, Ashley has never been found. Tenderfoot TV has offered a $50,000 reward in her case. There have also been other recent cases that have hit close to home for Matthew's aunt, Rhonda, and the larger community. Sometimes their names are mentioned in articles featuring Matthew and Ashley when the crisis of MMIP is discussed in Browning and beyond. For instance, in April of 2021, 2 unrelated disappearances were reported just days apart, both involving members of the Blackfeet Nation. 3-year-old Arden Preppian disappeared on April 22nd, and 26-year-old Leo Wagner on the 27th of April. By the summer of 2021, KRTV reported that, quote, the Blackfeet Tribal Business Council had established $10,000 rewards in each case. Both are still missing today, though their cases have taken different investigatory turns. Arden was, quote, last seen with her non-custodial uncle, Hayhax VL, who was watching her at the time of her disappearance. An extensive search followed, but only, quote, footprints leading to a river 50 yards away from where Arden was last seen were discovered, along with the shoes searchers believed to belong to the child. As of the time of this recording, Arden Preppian has still not been located, but her uncle and his partner were charged in relation with her case. Per the local Fox affiliate, her uncle was, quote, charged with negligent endangerment and child endangerment, and his partner with, quote, accountability. These charges were based on alleged failure to, quote, properly supervise a young child in potentially dangerous conditions. According to a Missoulian article from late 2021, Arden's uncle was eventually given, quote, a 9-month suspended sentence that included house arrest for negligent endangerment. At his sentencing, Arden's uncle, quote, accepted responsibility for the loss of Arden. Via reporting on the court case, It was explained that Arden's uncle had been watching her on the evening she disappeared and had taken her to the Two Medicine River area so that he could practice target shooting. Per the Missoulian, quote, he noticed Arden was missing while he was reloading his gun. After looking around, he saw footprints of hers leading toward the river, starting about 40 to 50 yards from where the water was. He and his girlfriend searched for several hours, and then his girlfriend called law enforcement to report her disappearance. End quote. The uncle's girlfriend's charges were dropped per the plea agreement. According to KURL-8, her mother, Arbana Pepian, passed away in October of 2022 with no definitive answers as to what had happened to her daughter. KURL also reported that the Silent Warrior Coalition, an advocacy group formed in 2016 on the Blackfeet Reservation, had, along with Arden's loved ones, continued efforts to find her to this day. The Missoulian notes that fewer details are available in Leo's case, but that he was, quote, last seen by family and friends near the St. Mary and Bab areas, east of Glacier National Park, on April 27, 2021. An extensive search of the area turned up, quote, clothing and items thought to belong to Wagner at a cabin in the area. Quote, a spokesperson for Blackfeet law enforcement said that the recovered clothing items, quote, indicate Wagner was severely injured. Leo's family and a professional they engaged found further evidence near the cabin, but Leo has so far not been found. In July of 2022, the Bureau of Indian Affairs announced that their missing and murdered unit would be taking the lead in both Arden and Leo's missing persons cases. According to the Independent Record, as of June of 2022, quote, there were 173 active missing persons cases in Montana. Of those, 44 of those cases, or 25%, were listed as Native American. Indigenous people account for 6.7% of the state's population. End quote. And according to an ABC News segment that featured Monty Hills, a tribal law scholar, the cases of missing and murdered on reservations can be made more complicated by the overlapping agencies who may be involved. Mills explained, quote, fundamentally, you have 3 different governments who are responsible for protecting public citizens in Indian country: the federal government, state governments, and tribal governments. And anytime you get 3 governments together to try and do anything, it becomes challenging. Things have certainly been challenging for Matthew Grant's family. From the very first days of his disappearance to today, when his homicide case remains open, his Aunt Rhonda and his other loved ones have continued to pursue answers. And Rhonda feels those answers are readily available. It's just a matter of law enforcement feeling that they have enough evidence to finally move forward. As we told you at the beginning of this episode, Matthew grew up in both Alberta, Canada, and in Montana. Though he spent more time in Canada, his visits to Montana and his father's family were significant. And when he came to the United States in the fall of 2015, he had plans to make Montana his permanent home. Much of Matthew's family lived within the towns and communities within the Blackfeet Indian Reservation. Per the official state website, the reservation stretches over 1.5 million acres and encompasses towns and communities like Browning, Bab, Hart Butte, and more. The 2020 census reported that there were less than 10,000 people living on the Blackfeet Reservation, but per Kaiser Health News, it's very unlikely that that number is accurate. Per Kaiser, a study showed that 6% of the total Native population living on reservations in the United States, or about 1 in 17 people residing on reservations, were missed in the 2020 census count. This isn't the first time an undercount has happened, as the 2010 census had similar issues. This matters for many reasons. It affects how funding is granted, quote, for healthcare, social services, education, and infrastructure. The Blackfeet Reservation population is mentioned specifically in this Kaiser report as being underrepresented in size. So, again, those census numbers don't paint an accurate picture of everyone living there. And on the other side of the coin, the official counts of the missing and murdered may not be accurate either. It is an epidemic issue that expert Anita Lucchese of the Sovereign Bodies Institute explained to us on the Fall Line in February of 2021.
Grand Canyon University makes earning your degree possible with over 130 academic programs for traditional campus students, with more than 80 bachelor's programs offered online. GCU provides you with the personal support you need, from complimentary unofficial transcript evaluations within 24 business hours to scholarships, academic support, and your GCU graduation team, led by your own university counselor. Find your purpose at GCU. Private, Christian, affordable. Visit gcu.edu.